Hi, I'm Lori Marino. Welcome to this live webinar, jointly sponsored by the Whale Sanctuary Project and the Camella Center for Scholarship-Based Animal Advocacy. I am the president of the Whale Sanctuary Project, and we are creating a seaside sanctuary for beluga whales and orcas in Nova Scotia. And I am looking forward to our project playing an important role in humane education about marine mammals, their protection and conservation. Humane education continues to play an important role in its focus on the relationship between humans and domestic species. And as more and more people no longer want to see wild animals held captive in zoos and circuses and marine parks, a new opportunity is opening up for collaboration between humane educators and wild animal sanctuaries. Today, I'm talking about the role wild animal sanctuaries can play in expanding the world of humane education with three experts in the fields of humane education and sanctuary science. They are Mina Alagapan, who leads the work of Humane Education Advocates Reaching Teachers, or HEART, a nonprofit public charity in New York City, Chicago, and Indianapolis. Mina was a humane education consultant for the Animal Welfare Trust before her position, and she is a former chair of the animal law committees of the American Bar Association and the New York City Bar. She's also a fellow of the American Bar Foundation and serves on the board of directors of the Mayor's Alliance for New York City's Animals. She has a BA from Cornell, a JD from Northwestern, and an MS in Animals and Public Policy from Tufts University School of Veterinary Medicine. We also have Kim Corona, who serves as the Senior Program Director at the nonprofit HEART. While at HEART, Kim has taught and developed programs about animal protection and social justice and environmental ethics. She has for several years conducted humane education and humane living workshops for the Institute for Humane Education. She received her Master's of Education from Cambridge College, along with the Certificate of Humane Education. She earned her BA from Goddard College in affiliation with Green Mountain College in Vermont. And finally, Catherine Doyle, who is the Director of Science, Research, and Advocacy for the Performing Animal Welfare Society, or PAWS, which cares for elephants, bears, tigers, and other wild animals rescued and retired from circuses, zoos, and the exotic animal trade. Well, I'm happy to have everyone here today. And to start things off, let's hear from Mina. Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. I really appreciate this opportunity to discuss HEART's work and the important role that sanctuaries can play in humane education. HEART's a New York-based nonprofit public charity that's a full-service humane education provider. We teach student programs from K to 12, we train teachers, and we develop educational resources. Our goal through humane education is to inspire compassion for animals, people, and the planet, while really motivating youth to become agents of positive change. Humane education, just to describe it briefly, it encompasses content related to animal protection, social justice, and environmental ethics, and it explores their interconnections. It provides students with the knowledge and the tools to make more informed, compassionate, and socially responsible decisions. Some of the major desirable outcomes from humane education programs are the development of critical thinking skills, empathy, compassion, and youth empowerment. Humane education really takes root with reflection. We don't tell students what to think and what's right or wrong. We have them really think about what information they're exposed to, and reach their own conclusions. We also provide alternatives and opportunities for students to take action. So even though we discuss some really heavy issues, it's always in the context of what can they do to make a difference. I wanted to just briefly share a couple of our evaluations that we did with control groups. In the first study, the Humane Education students demonstrated increased knowledge on a number of issues, including, for example, the effect of garbage on animals and the environment, the needs of wild animals, and habitat destruction. They also showed more concern about pollution and the way animals are treated, like all domesticated and wild animals. On a behavioral level, the intervention students showed more commitment to humane actions by setting good examples, changing daily choices, joining clubs to help animals, the environment, and engaging in the legislative process. In another study that was published, the Humane Education students were more pro-social than the students in the control group. So they engaged in behaviors intended to benefit others and society as a whole. We have a lot of our free resources that we've developed on our website, so please do visit us. We've published 5 resource guides in partnership with some other organizations with over 120 standards-aligned lessons. We have a deck of 180 humane education activity cards, a digital educational game, a climate literacy toolkit, humane literature book list, videos, and more. We've partnered with sanctuaries in different ways. For example, we partnered with Farm Sanctuary to develop a guide for K-3 teachers that helps students understand the feelings, needs, and natural behaviors of farm animals. We also have had students want to engage in service projects to benefit sanctuaries. So, for example, they engage in fundraising to sponsor specific animals at sanctuaries. They also, in this case, ran a blanket drive for a primate sanctuary. After learning about the lives of captive chimps and animal testing, students got creative and made these chimpinadas, which are these paper mache balls stuffed with treats that were sanctuary approved for rescued chimps. When it arrived, just going clockwise with the pictures here, when it arrived at Save the Chimp Sanctuary, one of the chimps didn't know what it was and kicked it, and he heard a sound, and he ripped it apart, and when he found the food, he shared the prize with a friend, and the kids got a kick out of this. Recently, we partnered with LEAP, which is Leaders for Ethics, Animals, and the Planet, to develop curriculum. This was founded by 3 California farm animal sanctuaries, Rancho Compasión, Blackbird Creek, and Jameson Humane, and is beginning a movement to reach youth nationwide. It offers high school participants the opportunities for hands-on animal care experience, humane education, and a scholarship for volunteering at the sanctuaries. The program itself addresses the ethics of using animals in industry, the care of rescued animals, and what we can do to curb climate change. And it culminates in a community-based project related to the rescued animals. Now, the sanctuaries, it can just be amazing centers for humane education. They can have an incredible ripple effect, I think, in society, by helping students really connect with the animals and having them learn about various institutionalized forms of animal cruelty. It can really inspire them to raise community awareness about the issues and try to change the systems, the oppressive systems that these animals are subjected to. Over the years, we've actually seen a fair amount of interest from shelters and sanctuaries and rescue groups in humane education. So a few years ago, we launched the Heart Network, which is designed to help shelters and rescue groups and sanctuaries with their humane education initiatives. And it's a free service, and Kim is heading this program, so I'm going to turn it over to her now to describe it and some featured lessons as well.
Thank you so much, Nina. Thank you.
My pleasure.
All right, thank you all so much for being here, and thank you, Lori, for having us, and thanks for the introduction, Mina. And just like Mina said, I'm following up right where Mina left off, talking to you about our Heart Network initiative. So as Mina mentioned, this network was really started specifically for animal protection organizations, animal sanctuaries who are interested in doing humane education. And we provide educational materials via email periodically throughout the year to support them in starting and expanding their humane education efforts. So just as you can see here, these are some examples of some of the resources that we provide in our Humane Network, and they demonstrate our approach of comprehensive humane education with a focus on animal protection, all different topics facing animals, including issues facing wildlife. And when anyone joins our Heart Network, they have access to our member center, which has archived all the materials that we have provided since its launch in 2018. So we want to highlight some of the lessons that we have shared with you so you can sort of see what it looks like in action. And these lessons have been featured in our member center, and some of them are also available in the free guides that Mina referred to earlier. So I'm not going to review these lessons in their entirety, but I'm going to focus on some of the key aspects of these lessons. Respecting animal neighbors was designed for early learners, and the purpose of this lesson is really for young people to recognize that we share our community not only with other people, but with our other species as well, our animal neighbors. And educators can modify this lesson to focus on the animals that live in their local community. So one of the things the students do is they go on a pretend nature walk with animal puppets around the room. So they go on a nature walk and they think about how to respectfully observe and coexist with other species. And they learn about these species as well. As an extension, after students have practiced at this young age, teachers could actually take them outside and into their natural world to really observe these animals in a respectful way. Our animal communication lesson was designed for upper elementary students, although I have modified this lesson for younger students and older students. So students learn some examples of some of the ways that certain dolphins, bears, and elephants actually communicate with one another. So this lesson really shows students that animals are here for their own reasons. They have their own complex social, emotional, and intellectual lives with each other. The students learn about some examples of potential ways that humans have threatened these individuals through story. And then they think about how those animals might communicate what they're feeling with each other by looking at the communication examples and actually acting out how do they think these animals might express what they're feeling and identifying those feelings. Understanding others through perspective taking is a lesson that we designed for secondary students. And in this lesson, students practice the skill of looking at something from someone else's perspective. They'll read stories of different animals and specifically animals who have been used by humans in what some people consider to be entertainment. And then they compare and contrast that to what those same species' lives are like in a natural habitat. So students are really kind of seeing their lives in these different settings. And then they're asked a series of critical thinking questions, including when animals are given their own agency, where do you think they would choose to live? Where would they want to be? We have a similar lesson to this Animals, It's Their World too for younger students. So at the end of this lesson, we're really encouraging students to think about how does perspective taking influence their attitudes and their behaviors. So when we teach our humane education lessons, our students are often really engaged. I mean, this is content that they're interested in, and they have really thoughtful conversations, and sometimes they're really eager to take action. So as Mina discussed earlier, we don't tell the students what to think, but we do provide them a space to take action because they've thought about these issues, they care about them, and oftentimes they want to do something based on how they think and feel. So to share just a handful of examples of ways that students have taken action, as Mina mentioned earlier, sometimes they write letters to elected officials, sometimes they write letters to companies about concerns about policies or practices. And we have had students write letters to agencies about freeing animals who have been captive. In the bottom picture, that's an example of how students have used art to take action. In this case, the student is shedding light on how small bits of trash in particular can oftentimes be accidentally eaten by wild animals. It could be mistaken for food, or in this case, a marine animal accidentally swallowing that trash. And so the student is uses this as a social media art piece to spread awareness about that. The top picture shows how some students take direct action. So these students are doing a community cleanup after learning about the harm that litter can have on wildlife. The newspaper clipping highlights a student that had been in some of our programs. And in this newspaper article, it's showing how she was testifying in support of a proposal to ban the use of animals in circuses in New York City. And that proposal did get passed. And then the bottom picture shows a group of students from a camp that we co-led, and they were lobbying to their city council to adopt a climate resolution to mitigate and reduce their carbon footprint in the city, and they were successful. And of course, we know how climate change is affecting all people, all species on our planet. So if you want to bring humane education to young people that you know, whether you're a parent, a guardian, a relative, a family friend, neighbor, teacher, you work at a sanctuary, youth educator, you can access our educational resources. We try to write them in a way that they're really accessible, and they're at teachheart.org. And if you're an animal protection organization, we really encourage you to consider joining our Heart Network so that we can support you in doing humane education in whatever way works for you. And feel free to contact Mina or myself if you have any questions about Heart or the work that we do.
Thank you so much. I'll just say I'm so heartened to see just, you incorporating wild animals into your presentation, because this is really, what this webinar is about. It's about this new facet, this new face to humane education that goes beyond domestic animals, beyond farmed animals, into the realm of wild animals, wild animal welfare and conservation. So I was really excited and appreciative to see so many of your programs are also, they fit so well with the notion of wild animals. And so that's very exciting. Before we get to our next presentation, I know I gave Catherine short shrift in the beginning with my bio. So I also want to mention that besides being the Director of Science, Research, and Advocacy for the Performing Animal Welfare Society, she has been working with captive wildlife for 20 years. And she leads research efforts at PAWS on the behavior of African elephants. She directs PAWS public policy efforts. And she is also on the steering committee for the Big Cat Sanctuary Alliance and in the advisory board for the Whale Sanctuary Project and a founding member of the Bear Alliance. We're going to continue our conversation with Catherine's presentation, and then we'll get to some interesting discussion.
Okay. Well, first of all, I want to say that was an amazing presentation, Kim and Mina. I loved it. That was really great.
Oh.
I love perspective taking. That's anyway. And Lori, thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to talk about this program that we've developed at PAWS, Wild Animals in Captivity, exploring the interface between humans and wildlife. So I'm going to be, trying to move my slide forward. There we go. So I thought I would start off with, of course, some pretty pictures of PAWS, of our sanctuary, which is in Northern California. And this is just some of our elephant areas. If you look kind of the green hill up and to the right a bit, that's Prince that you'll see there. And this is Mara Antica down at the lake in the African habitat area. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about PAWS and what we do before I talk about the program. So basically, PAWS was formed in 1984 to rescue and provide sanctuary for neglected, abused, or retired captive wild animals. And our animals come from a variety of places, from mainly from zoos and circuses, some from the exotic pet trade, from cub heading operations, and from private owners. Our main facility is R2000, which is a 2,300 acre natural habitat sanctuary. And we are not open to the public because we want to provide the utmost privacy for our animals. Of course, many who have had, who've been abused or neglected in the past. And really both the late Pat Derby and Ed Stewart are the co-founders of PAWS. And what they wanted to do with R2000 was to create this really a model for other facilities to follow, that for a better way to care for wild animals already in captivity. And that was through providing these very large and dynamic, expansive environments where we could promote greater autonomy. You know, the animals could have more say in how they spend their day and what they want to do. Also to promote natural behaviors. For example, our elephants can forage naturally on grass and on trees. The bears actually right now, of course, with acorns falling from our oak trees, they're going to be stuffing themselves on acorns. We are a true sanctuary, which means we do not buy, sell, breed, or trade our animals. They don't perform, we don't take them off site, and there's no public contact with them. And as a true sanctuary, the interests of the animals come first. There is no agenda. Like I said, they're not there to be on display or to be an ambassador for anyone. It's really just about giving them the best life possible. And part of that, of the work we do, is rehabilitation. And really the sanctuary itself is a big part of that, because these animals, when they're brought into more natural environments, and also very environments that change, and they can change with the seasons, they can change when the winds, the wind changes, there's going to be new scents, there's going to be new sounds and new sights for them. And really, and ultimately the goal is that they just relax and that they're able to be a tiger, be an elephant, be a bear. And of course, as a true sanctuary as well, we provide a home for them for life. Education is very important to us at PAWS. That's why I'm here today. But also advocacy. We really believe in going at the problem at the root to try to stop the systems of exploitation that are actually causing these animals to either live in misery for their entire lives, or the lucky ones make their way to good sanctuaries. Okay, so the aim of the program is to introduce students to empirical and ethical issues surrounding captive wild animals. But we really want to, this, as was mentioned earlier, we don't want to just tell the students what to think. This is about leading them to examine their own interactions with captive wildlife, if it's in circuses, zoos, but also, their perceptions, how do they perceive these animals, and how does that shape the way they think about them, or in most cases distort their view of wild animals. And we really want them to make the connection and about how this perception of captive wildlife actually has a bigger effect. It has an effect on understanding who these animals are, but also there are consequences for free living wildlife and conservation. There have been studies done that show that seeing an endangered species, such as a chimpanzee, in an entertainment context leads these people to think that they're not endangered, basically. So, and that's going to affect conservation. And finally, of course, we want to promote critical thinking. So we developed the program in 2017. I worked together with an intern, Nicole, and who at the time was working on her master's at Canisius College. It was a master's in anthrozoology. It's where I also graduated from with my master's there in anthrozoology. And it's a 4-hour program that we hold at the R2000 Sanctuary. Our audience has always been intended to be college level students and faculty. And so what we do is individuals don't sign up for the program. A professor will bring their class, and often they do bring other faculty with them. And the class subjects have included, you can see a range there, zoology, animal, we had a great one on animal law, where we brought in someone from Animal Legal Defense Fund to even provide more information for the students, biology, conservation biology. We launched the program in spring 2018, but unfortunately, because of COVID, it's been on hold since 2020. So basically, this is how the day works. We meet the students and faculty and provide some background on PAWS to begin with, as well as some safety information for any visitor who comes to PAWS. And then we provide a lecture on the behavior and biology of elephants, tigers, and black bears, because those are the animals that they'll be visiting that day. And we also talk about the problems associated with the confinement of these animals. We then go into the sanctuary for a tour with myself and with our sanctuary manager, Brian Busta. And that way, then students are going to experience the animals. They're also going to learn their rescue stories, with how they were used and in some cases abused, what their individual histories are. So, and I'll give you an example. One of the elephants that we talk about is Nicholas. He was born into a circus, and those are actually photos of him in the circus, on top riding this tricycle device, and then also, standing on a beam. And by age 5, Nicholas, being a bull elephant especially, he was considered to be too strong and too uncontrollable to use in the circus anymore. So he was going to be warehoused in a dark barn for the rest of his life. That's where he was going to live. And fortunately, he was able to come to PAWS. So the next part of our day, after the students hear the animal stories and the rescue stories, and in which we always, of course, tie back into the information on behavior and biology. We have a working lunch where the students, we provide questions to them, and they break out into smaller groups to discuss these questions, and then come back to the larger group to provide their answers, and then also followed by a general discussion. And then we also inform students about ways that they can get involved if they're interested in captive wildlife issues, how they can get involved now, or even maybe look into working with captive wildlife as a profession, or in various capacities. It could be law, it could be work at a sanctuary, it could be in advocacy. And then we also have students complete an evaluation of the program. So to measure the effectiveness of the program, like I said, we have a student and faculty evaluation form, and which really they demonstrated that students definitely were coming away with not just with knowledge, but with new knowledge. They really learned about things that they just had no idea about. And of course, the rescue stories definitely had a strong impact on the students. We also did a pre-post survey with questions that were looking at attitudes towards animals, and we wanted to see if there was a shift in those attitudes after visiting the sanctuary, and that's something that's still in progress. And one thing is, I will say, it was challenging to get students to complete both surveys, especially the post. So actually at the very last class, we made them do it there. And we're going to be doing that going forward to ensure we get that post survey. Just some of the challenges and mitigations. Again, we wanted students to come to their own conclusions about keeping elephants, tigers, and bears in captivity. And so that's why originally we didn't have the lecture element. We added that so the students could make comparisons for themselves. The information was fresh in their minds, and and they learned about the social structures and space and behaviors for each species. We didn't want the students, this was the toughest one, we didn't want the students to just be looking at the animals as if they were in a zoo. So we always informed the students that they were going to be seeing the animals as they lived at the sanctuary. No attempts were going to be made to have the animals come closer or even be visible. In fact, we would tell them in advance, you might not see, our tigers might not want to be visible, their bears might not want to be. But probably the most effective was, and this is when you're about 12 feet away from a tiger enclosure, and everyone, you would say, well, what's your perception? What do you think of these animals? And of course, everyone's like, oh, my cat does that. Oh yeah, look at that. That's so cute. And then we pose the question, well, what if there's no fence there? What's your perception of these animals then? And as you can imagine, the perception changes dramatically, right? And then leads to a larger discussion. We also didn't want to normalize captivity because, as great as our sanctuary is, there are limitations for the animals there. And so we did explain these limitations of any captive facility, including our own. So here's just some of the students. I thought I'd share some photos of some of the classes that came. And thank you so much. I look forward to questions.
Wonderful. I want to thank all of you for your fantastic presentations. I have to say, I'm so excited and enthusiastic about all the ways that Humane Education can really interface with sanctuaries, as well as animal law. I mean, that's a whole other area that's very, very interesting.
Yeah,
I want to ask a couple of questions before we get to our audience. And one of the things that struck me about Mina, Kim, Catherine, all of your presentations was your mention of critical thinking. And I know that HEART is very, if you go on your website, it's, you know, you talk about critical thinking. That's something that is very unusual and also, I think, very, very important. Can you say anything more about what that is and how you envision that as being part of humane education? How do you actually try to promote critical thinking? And maybe even say a little bit about how you define critical thinking. Mina?
Sure.
Start
So
there.
absolutely. So first, I want to say, Catherine, that was an amazing presentation. It was so great to learn more about, your program there. And I'd love to visit the sanctuary. So with critical thinking, yeah, we want kids to really think hard about the information presented to them, to question it, to interpret, to analyze, to evaluate, to synthesize information, and reach their own conclusions and decisions. So, that's what we really encourage. And some strategies to do that are by asking them lots of questions, higher order thinking questions, and to have them make connections between different topics and think about just identify the root causes of issues, have them compare and contrast situations. That helps promote critical thinking too, and engage them in group activities, because then they have an opportunity to also think about, to see how others are thinking and to collaboratively problem solve. But just kind of in broad strokes, I would say those are some of the things we do, but I'll let Kim chime in with some more specifics of, just examples perhaps of questions, Kim.
Thank you.
Yeah, now I'll just speak briefly because I see, Catherine also was wanting to weigh in on this, and I appreciated the way that you shared that you're doing critical thinking at Pause. But just following up with what Mina said in terms of what HEART does, when I was in graduate school and I was learning Humane Ed, Zoile, who was the founder, she said, what if I went into a class and I just told the students what I thought? And then the next day, someone came in and said the exact opposite because they were from an industry that I was critiquing, or they were doing something I critiqued, right? So I want to add, besides how to do critical thinking, why, even if someone thinks, oh, but then you're just not telling the kids what's right. When it comes to these issues, we don't have settled decisions on them as a society. And young people, especially, which is the demographic that we're working with at HEART, they are so impressionable. So we don't want to come in there and tell them that we are the truth. And then another adult comes in and says the exact opposite and says that's the truth. So we need to develop that skill so they really decide how they think and feel. And that's how we develop really thoughtful conversations, and students can be honest with what they're, how they think. And if we don't create that space where they can be honest with what they think, how can we have discussions where we provide them with the space to stretch and grow their minds, right? So like Mina said, when we teach these topics, we don't come in and tell them a certain agenda. We have critical thinking questions, higher order thinking questions planned in advance. And sometimes when students ask me something directly, right, or any of us as educators at HEART, I'm not necessarily going to just answer that question. I'm going to say, that's a great question. Let's open it up to the whole class. Like, what do you all think about that based on what we just learned? And then we set that up just with the example of the lesson that I shared, with kind of comparing and contrasting these animals' lives. And besides those stories, we actually give them a handout to think about, what are their social interactions like in these different settings? What are their diets like in these different settings? What is their ability to have their own agency in these different settings? What kinds of activities do they engage in? And when students see that, more times than not, they come to, certain conclusions by thinking critically. They're really questioning and examining these situations where animals are being used by humans, many times in ways that they would not be acting, right, in their natural habitats. Like, the students can see that on their own. We don't have to tell them that. So we just give them the materials that they need and the tools that they need to think about it. Now, it's not just the information, right? Because what do I do with that? So we have to give them the space. So we foster compassion by looking at individuals. We ask those good critical thinking questions, and then we provide them an opportunity to think about, if I'm concerned about this, then what can I do? And sometimes we share examples of things out there that people are doing who are concerned, so they can decide, is that something I agree with? So that's a way that Humane Ed and Sanctuaries can really partner together, is we can show Sanctuaries an example. These were some people who were concerned about this, and this is what they did. What do you think about that as an action to take?
Yeah, that's great. And I think, also, and, what you're doing is you're giving people skills and tools that they can use in other circumstances. And that's a good thing. Catherine, you want to say anything about critical thinking? So important.
Yeah, I was gonna say, yeah, it's definitely important. And actually, both Kim and Mina, you're giving even more ideas for when we resume.
Exactly.
So I can be in touch with you for sure. But I think, with the classes that come, we don't hide the fact that, that we are not pro captivity. We don't gloss that over at all, for wild animals. But I think definitely, like I said, once we added the lecture element, I thought that was really important, because then students, were both, like I said, they were getting the information about, behavior and biology. So then when they did hear about the issues these animals face in captivity, they were, like I said, the information's fresh. They have those comparisons there. Then we go out into the sanctuary and they hear the real life stories. So, and also at the end too, the discussion, I think, because like I said, we posed questions that they had to work with in groups, but then, when it came back to the larger group, it was a bigger discussion. And certainly, and those questions were not easy questions, and we do bring ethics into it. And I think, yeah, that's certainly, we made the students work for sure, made their brains work.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yep. We have lots and lots and lots of fantastic questions. And I just want to, before we get to that, I have to ask all of you, because we are building this whale sanctuary project in Nova Scotia, it's a wild animal sanctuary. And a lot of things that Catherine mentioned about wild animals and not having direct contact with them and it being a true sanctuary, all of that stands. It is based upon all the empirical evidence about how dolphins and whales live in tanks and where they should actually be living. I just wanted to, and we'll continue this conversation, but for Megan and Kim first, are there ways you can see HEART and the Whale Sanctuary Project working together?
Absolutely. And I'd love to brainstorm with you after the webinar, because I can see a lot of collaborative possibilities, the magnitude of which would obviously depend on the extent to which we could get support for the new initiative. But I think I could easily see like the stories of your animals at the sanctuary being so powerful for the students. And I could see incorporating it into our curriculum and helping you develop humane education lessons around those stories. That could easily be done. And I also think that, with live cams, it would be an opportunity to incorporate virtual tours, in our classroom, and even for us to work with your educators to develop, lessons for classroom visits that they do in schools that they could pair with virtual tours of your sanctuary. There are really a lot of possibilities.
So much. It's so exciting, and it opens up all these exciting possibilities. But yes, we will talk more about that, and the audience can look forward to more interesting conversations about that. Kim or Catherine, and then we'll take our questions.
Yeah, I'll just add to what Mina said. So we talked about the critical thinking piece of Humane Ed, but there's also the fostering empathy. And so much of that comes from individual stories. And, whether our lesson is about, another person that is being exploited or another species, whether they're an animal companion, whether they're a wildlife animal or an animal who's been farmed, we oftentimes incorporate real stories of individuals. And
Mhm.
that makes a big difference, right? You know, it's like you can hear these numbers, but when you hear an individual story, I mean, just like what Catherine said at Pause, that story of Nicholas, if, you know, we shared that same story in our classroom, even though the students are seeing that animal, we're bringing that animal to the students. And that's a great way for organizations who are doing humane ed to highlight the work of the sanctuary by, you know, telling, when we talk about these issues of harm that wildlife animals are experiencing, these are individuals that have really went through that, and that's something that they really remember. So same thing with the Whale Sanctuary Project. Any dolphins or whales that you all you know, help, they will have their own stories, just like Mina
Right.
said, and to be able to share that, then it makes it more meaningful and more real, the issue that we're talking about.
And unlike a marine park or a zoo, we can tell the real story.
Yeah.
We can tell those individuals real stories, and we can say full out, this individual should be living in the ocean, or this individual should be living in the wild. And they're not, and this is why. Catherine?
Yeah. No, I mean, I think it's pretty much been said. And like I said already, you know, I've gotten some great ideas from this, but certainly, I mean, humane education, I think, is just hugely important. And we even saw in, you know, speaking of, like, well, you were saying, Lori, we can tell the real stories. And
Mhm.
it is important because it also helps to see people to see these animals as individuals who have their individual histories. Some of them, say elephants that were taken from the wild, they had families originally in Africa and Asia, you know, that they were basically kidnapped from. So, and I really do think people do connect with those stories. And
Yes.
so, yeah. And like I said, in the evaluations we did, I mean, it was very clear that the rescue stories and the animals' individual histories were really important to the students, really struck a chord.
Yep. Well, all very, very interesting. We have a ton of questions, so we're gonna switch to some questions from the audience, if you don't mind. We have one here from Emily, who says that, you know, her impression is that most humane education is done with children, and that's critical. But there's also an urgent need to do so with adults. Catherine, you're doing it with college age people. And what are your thoughts on humane education at the adult level? Are Hearts resources being adapted for programs for adults, for instance?
I'm really glad that question was asked. I think, you know, we do a lot of trainings for teachers, non-traditional as well as traditional school teachers. And in those workshops, we'll get, you know, a variety of people, just concerned citizens, parents, you know, just they could be lawyers, they could be anybody. And they're just people who really want to, you know, reach the next generation. And I think that they're really valuable. But I'll also say that our students often become humane educators themselves and go home and teach their families. I mean, we've seen that time and time again, parents saying, oh, you know, we learned this. And, you know, so I think that they often know a lot more than the adults around them. So they end up becoming, you know, effective messengers. But a lot of our professional development workshops that we do, we find that it's news to the teachers. I mean, they don't know about a lot of these issues, the animal, you know, welfare issues. And so that is a very important audience to reach. Our focus with our direct teaching tends to be with the student, with the K-12 students, but we do a lot of, you know, workshops and trainings for adults. Kim, do you want to chime in on anything there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you covered well, Mina, how, you know, Hearts focus, but that there are indirect ways that we are reaching adults all the time. And I think this is another way that sanctuaries have a great opportunity to possibly be offering programs specifically geared towards adults. Because if you're doing virtual programming about the work at your sanctuary and why you're doing it, a lot of adults might come because they're interested, you know, they love animals, and maybe they're coming, they're not really realizing how the animals came to be at the sanctuary in the first place, why they're there, and the real, you know, the mission of your sanctuary of trying to encourage people to examine the relationship between animals and how they're sometimes exploited in different situations. So I think that's another great way that sanctuaries can provide programming for adults.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we were going to, before the pandemic, that was our next step because we had so much interest. We would run stories in our newsletter after the classes, came to the sanctuary. And we got a lot of requests from adults, who were interested in the program, wanted to know if they could come. So we were actually looking at doing a class like that, where in that case, well, it was free for the students and for professors. There was no charge for that. So we were thinking of doing, like, for a small fee, doing that for adults at the sanctuary. And I do think it would be really effective, for sure.
Yeah. There's another question here about sanctuaries from someone who says that PAWS is certified by the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries. Why is that important? Why is certification important?
Pretty simple. I mean, it's accreditation, if you will. And it's just, basically it shows that a sanctuary is adhering to certain standards and certain high standards of, and not just in care for the animals, importantly, but also, well, there's other things too, that people can't be, for wild animals, people can't be hands-on with them and that, but also it's how your sanctuary is run. It's your succession planning. It's your governance. I mean, they look at everything, they look at it holistically. So, and I think it's important then, and if people are looking, to visit a sanctuary that is open to the public, it is important to look to see if the sanctuary is accredited or verified by GFAS, as it's called. Also, there's Big Cat Sanctuary Alliance, and we have 16 members around the US. And PAWS, well, I'm on the steering committee for Big Cat Sanctuary Alliance. And that's another indicator, because we do have certain standards, if you will, that sanctuaries have to meet in order to be a member. So.
Yes, and I would just mention that the Whale Sanctuary Project is working with the National Aquarium and the Sea Life Trust, and we've developed accreditation standards for cetacean sanctuaries. So those will be coming online pretty soon, and it's really important. I know Mina or Kim, you generally work with domesticated animals. So what are your criteria, guidelines for how you determine whether it's a good place for the animals?
So in terms of working with domesticated animals, we've taken students on field trips to sanctuaries for farm animals, and but in terms of our content with what we teach, we cover everything. Yeah, so that's been broad from the beginning, but we're in urban areas, in New York City and Chicago, Indianapolis. And so, the realistic thing, if we want to take kids to on a field trip to a sanctuary, has been like an hour and a half upstate kind of thing. And, it's been a very different experience, obviously, because they're accosted by turkeys who want hugs, and they give pigs belly rubs. They have goats following them around the sanctuary. I mean, it's a very different type of reality with interacting with the animals. And so, if there are situations with animals, we know the story, and they're not wanting that contact, and they need their privacy, deserve their privacy, we tell the students that, and they respect that. So it's always guided by, the sanctuaries that, we know are really good sanctuaries, and they kind of guide us with that in terms of the extent of the contact that they can have with the animals. But it is very different, and that's a fundamental difference here with the, sanctuaries for domesticated animals versus wild animals, because with the wild animal sanctuaries, you need clear boundaries for the visitors. But I still think that with both, regardless of whether there's interaction or physical proximity, just the sanctuary itself, with the way it cares for, in this wonderful way, these rescued animals that have been horribly mistreated. I mean, just the stories of their lives and the exploitation they suffered. I mean, and then being able to observe them in a setting where they're exhibiting their natural behaviors and they're safe from harm, that's just really powerful for the students and helps them connect, whether or not they are physically touching an animal or, in the same physical space as an animal. So
Right, exactly, exactly. I have a question here from Keith. I wonder if that's Keith Lindsay. But anyway, this is a great question. Have you considered if and how to offer learning sessions for decision makers in government and possibly the private sector?
Well, I would say that, I mean, with pause, I mean, we do online presentations for adults too. I've done presentations to Rotary clubs and, you know, you name it. But
Sure.
so we do that. Decision makers is a little tougher. Yeah, that's definitely a little tougher. One could offer that. Well, I know that some organizations actually will offer their they have offered webinars that are specifically for decision makers. It takes a lot of work to get those people and get them to actually attend. But some of them, because Paz was involved with a webinar shortly after Tiger King, and the webinar was really to promote the Big Cat Public Safety Act, which is the federal bill that would end private ownership of big cats and direct contact with them. So, and there was a very good webinar that, and was pretty well attended too. And that was geared toward people in Washington, D.C. So usually it's not going to be the senator or the representative who's going to be sitting in on the webinar, but it's going to be a staff member. So that does actually occur. Yeah.
And I think, you know, there's some really exciting ways to sort of have an integration between policy and animal law and some of these kinds of less sanctuary-based lessons and humane lessons. So yeah, that's a burgeoning field right now. I know that there's a lot of integration of the concept of social justice in the idea of humane education. And I'd like to just briefly explore, you know, what that might mean, or what that looks like and why.
Yeah, so I'll just start and say the way that Hart has defined, humane education, sometimes we say comprehensive humane education to kind of distinguish. We've always seen social justice as an integral aspect of it, not apart from it. And the reason why is because, for us, our work is to challenge students to think critically and to have empathy about systemic issues, right? And so any systemic issue, there's an intertwining or interconnection between how humans are involved in that, fellow species, and our environment. And so we're really coming at human education from encouraging students to think about a justice mindset, right? So like one of our very first lessons in our core program is the circle of compassion, right? So we're kind of starting with this value that the students identify early on, we all agree compassion is a good value. And so who's included in that? And oftentimes, I won't go into the whole activity, but oftentimes by the end of that activity, students start to think maybe everybody should be in that circle. Like, is there anyone who shouldn't be? Even people who maybe caused harm to someone else. We owe a certain level of compassion and respect to them, right? Like, and that if we don't want that harm to continue, we have to extend compassion. And so what does compassion and justice look like in how we're treating anyone else, whether they're a person, other species, or the environment? And so the idea is that when we go through our lessons, we show a common thread, that it's about our values and what do those look like in our treatment of others. And we kind of examine different systems where a person or an animal or the environment is not being treated with justice. They're being exploited. And so they kind of see that there's a connection here that, do we want a society that's based on compassion and justice? And if so, what does that look like? And then when we see systems of exploitation and harm, whoever it's against, do we have a responsibility to stand up for them? And if so, how? And how are we working in solidarity with those who are being harmed? So that's sort of like the general, bigger philosophical way that social justice connects. But then on specific issues, if, we want to help a certain species, what are the root causes within people that's leading to that? And we can't ignore those harms, right? So like maybe someone's livelihood is, connected to this treatment of this animal because it became a social norm. So how do we take this person's needs and the animal's needs into consideration? So if we change the system, how are we also thinking about people and communities and saying, how are we going to change that system so that these people still have a livelihood? And, so these things sometimes come in conflict with each other. And it doesn't mean that we just say, well, we keep the system. It's saying, how do we reimagine that system? And that's what I kind of think sanctuaries are. They're a reimagining of systems that currently exist. And
Yes.
within that sanctuary system, we can be uplifting people, other species, and our environment based on how they're created.
Yeah,
Well said.
absolutely. I think that sanctuaries themselves are just great vehicles because I think people just connect on a very profound emotional level when they come to a sanctuary and hear the stories of the animals. And I think with students, they will then most likely want to reject the systems that oppress and discriminate against others. And I think that just the concept of sanctuary can inspire them to want to protect, other people too, who are subjected to injustices. So I think that sanctuary settings are great humane education vehicles.
Yes, I agree. Catherine, would you like to say anything
No, I
about
was just
that?
going to say it's one thing that we do in our program too, is really get students to see what their role is. Have you been to a circus? Have you been, or just, well, most people, maybe just you don't know better. So now once you have this information, what do you do with it and how do you bring about change? And I do think the students are definitely interested in that aspect of it as well, because in fact,
Absolutely.
we even early on had a lot of just even requests just for more information about how to get involved. And yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's it's certainly the case that, there aren't any bright lines here. Social justice is an integral part of how humans treat other humans and how humans treat other species. And it's not like those are qualitatively different. They're really psychologically in many ways connected.
Mhm.
And so that's really important. We are nearing the end of our wonderful time together, but I'd like to give everyone a chance to maybe say something, and also want to thank everyone who submitted questions. Let's start with Catherine.
Well, no, I just want to say, thank you again for having me today. Hopefully, we'll be getting our program started again next year,
Yeah.
and really looking forward to do. And in fact, really doing this presentation today has really got me excited about doing it again because it's been so
Yeah.
long. But no, and really, and I look forward to Mina and Kim, connecting with you as well for sure. And talking about just, I'm always looking to improve, our approach and the way we're doing things. So, and I love your take on sanctuary too, and the importance of sanctuary in social justice and the messages that it can send. And I think the public is definitely open to these messages too, because that's something else I'm looking at in another study, but I know that the mission of sanctuaries is really important to people for people that do come and visit sanctuaries. And as well as a couple other factors. But yeah, no, it's been great being on the webinar with you today. Thank you. It's been my honor.
Thank you. Kim?
Yeah, I just want to echo what Catherine said. I want to thank all these individuals who came out here today to hear about humane education and specifically how it's being used to promote care for wildlife and how sanctuaries are part of that. I want to thank Catherine for your presentation, and I look forward to connecting with you and partnering with you. I think there's a lot of ways that we can support each other. Of course, Mina, thank you for introducing her. And then my final words to everybody is just, I really think that education is such a key part of societal change. And what we're teaching our young people today is creating the future of tomorrow.
Absolutely. Well said. I think, I want to thank you all too. And from Heart's perspective, this has just been an exciting opportunity because we're looking to expand the reach of our programming too. And so it would be great to work more closely with sanctuaries, because I think that, like I said, I don't want to sound redundant here, but they are just incredible centers for humane education. You have so much at your fingertips there that just does the work, really, you've got the stories of the animals, you have the animals, and that magical connection that, students will have. They just have a natural affinity, children, to animals. So I think that, when we do our lessons, we see that when we bring in videos or photographs, it speaks volumes. But when you're talking about having a sanctuary setting, we've seen it firsthand when we've taken our kids on field trips. It's really something else. So we would love to really work with you and expand our reach with sanctuaries. Well, thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. And, Catherine and I are old buddies. We already publish and do work together because there's so many overlapping issues with elephants and orcas and whales and so forth. And I'm just looking forward to continuing this conversation with all of you, Mina, Kim, and Catherine, as always. Again, I want to thank everyone for being here. The time is much too short, and we will do more on humane education and sanctuaries because we've just gotten started. So again, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Kim, Catherine, and Mina, and everyone be well.